Welcome students to the new lecture of biology. The topic is fertilization. Successful pollination is always leading to fertilization. Let's see what fertilization means. Fertilization, it is the fusion of the nuclei of male gamete with the nuclei of the female gamete, finally leading to the formation of the zygote. Now, the gametes actually undergo various changes to become a gametophyte, then only fertilization takes place. The male gamete pollen grains, which is single celled and with a single nucleus, changes into a multinucleated structure, and a ovule, which is with a single cell and a single nucleus, changes into a multicellular structure to follow fertilization. Now, let's see what are the changes going on in the pollen grains. Actually, pollen grain is a single cell with two cell walls covering. The outer covering is called as the exine, which is hard, rough, and having gaps in it, which is called as the germ pore, and the inner wall is called as the intine, which is thin and smooth, and the two walls, they are binding the contents of the cell with a single nucleus in it. Now, this pollen grain is an immature structure which becomes a mature structure by dividing the nucleus into two nuclei. One nucleus is the tube nucleus, which is in the center, and the second is the generative nucleus, which is always on the side. At this two nuclei stage, the mature pollen grain is now going to land on the stigma after pollination takes place. Now, on landing, the pollen grain, it is going to form a pollen tube through the germ pore, and if you see in the C diagram that the tube nucleus in the front is leading the formation of pollen tube through in the ovary, and the behind nucleus is the generative nucleus. And in D diagram we see a fully mature male gametophyte is formed where three nuclei are there. The front is the tube nucleus, and the generative nucleus now has divided into a sperm nuclei or the male nuclei. Now let's see what are the changes going on in the ovule. A mature ovule is present in the ovary of a carpel with 7 cells in it and 8 nuclei. Let's see what is the structure in the ovule, mature ovule. The mature ovule has the two coverings called as the inner integument and the outer integument. The two integuments are having a gap in between. If you see in the south portion, there is a gap called micropyle, and the integuments are hiding in them a mass of cells which are called as the nucellus, and in the center of the nucellus is the sac, the embryo sac. In this embryo sac, it is that those 7 cells are present, and let's see the placing of the 7 cells. At the north pole of the embryo sac, there are 3 cells called antipodal cells whose function is still not defined. And the south pole, there are 3 cells. The middle cell is a large cell called the egg cell, surrounded by 2 cells which are synergids, and these synergids are helpers of egg cell, providing nourishment to the egg cell. And if any one if by chance the egg cell dies, one of the synergid will behave as the egg cell. Now, in the center of the embryo sac, there is only one cell with 2 nuclei. You can see there are 2 polar nuclei in the center. And if again fertilization is delayed, the 2 polar nuclei will change into secondary nucleus or the definitive nucleus. Now, both the pollen grains and the ovules have changed into the gametophytes to undergo fertilization. Now, on the carpel, the stigma, it has already received the pollen grains, and the pollen grains, they absorb the sugary solution which is secreted by the stigma as a welcome drink to the pollen grains. So the pollen grains, they swell up and they get a stimulus to develop a pollen tube. The tube nucleus helps in the formation of the pollen tube, which passes through the solid style by dissolving the tissue of the style with the help of the enzymes which have been secreted by the pollen tip of the pollen tube. And now, passing through the style, the pollen tube reaches the center of the ovary, where the ovule is ready, mm, and the pollen tube reaches near the micropyle opening of the ovule. And reaching at this point, if you remember the D diagram in the male gametophyte, it had three nuclei, tube nucleus and the two male nuclei. They reach over here. The purpose of the tube nucleus has now been fulfilled by the formation of pollen tube. So the tube nucleus degenerates, and now the two male nuclei would be deposited into the embryo sac for fertilization to take place. Now, in case of angiospermic flowering plants, the fertilization is called as double fertilization because two male nuclei have entered inside one of the two male gametes or the nuclei, which will fuse with the egg cell and form a zygote, and the second male nuclei will fuse with two polar nuclei which are in the center of the embryo sac, and they will form the endosperm nucleus. In this second fusion, we see there are three nuclei which have fused. So, students, this fusion is called as triple fusion. And in the whole embryo sac, there are two sets where fertilization or fusion has taken place. So, this is called as double fertilization. And at the end of this fertilization in the embryo sac, the zygote will change into an embryo, and endosperm nucleus will change into the nutritive tissue, which is called as endosperm. And the two set of cells, the antipodal cells and synergids, now are not required, so they will be degenerating. So in the embryo sac, the final fertilization has taken place, and let's see after fertilization what happens to the embryo sac as well as the flower. The fertilized egg will develop a hard cell wall around it, and it will change into a oospore. The ovary will get a stimulus to become a ripened and a mature ovary as a fruit. The ovary wall will change into a fruit wall, and the ovule will become a seed. The parts of the flower like sepals, petals and stamens, they will dry, wither, and they will fall off. And if you remember, in the mature female gametophyte, the ovule, there were two integuments. They will change into seed coat. The outer integument will become the testa, and the inner integument will become the tegmen. And finally, the whole structure will hide the embryonic plant inside it. And now if we see that there are two conditions. In one condition, like in brinjal, the calyx or the sepals, they may not fall off, and so we find a crown like structure on the head of the brinjal as a collection of calyx. And there are some fruits like grapes and cucumber where the fertilization does not take place. So the fruit formation still is undergoing without fertilization, and this phenomena is called as parthenocarpy. Now the reproductive structure, the flower has already undergone pollination, fertilization, and finally developed a fruit and a seed. Now what is the significance of forming such structures? The fruits, they are actually protecting the immature seed within them, and the fruits are also forming the food for human beings, birds, as well as the other animals. For human beings, they're providing vitamins, minerals, sugar, and so on. And we can see that even the scattering of the seeds or dispersal of the seeds is carried on with the help of certain animals. The fruits are, they are helping in it. The fruits, they are hiding the new embryonic plant within them, and helping the embryonic plant to overcome the unfavorable conditions. So, students, this was the end result of the story of the flower leading to the formation of fruit and seed. I hope you liked the whole story of the flower and the end result, which was a sweet one. And now, students, there would be an assignment and a worksheet which would be following. So please do it carefully and sincerely. Thank you.